All right, guys, we're picking up in this full stack CRUD app from scratch series. This little D&D note-taking application I'm building for funsies and to teach y'all a bunch of free coding concepts in this MERN stack I've chosen on YouTube here. So we're going to continue on, continuing through our register, our auth, and stuff like that. We need to, we're almost time to actually start working on the React side of things, which I've been waiting for personally for a bit here. We have the ability to register new users and things like that. And I believe we're going to finish out our CRUD applications for this router here, as I showed y'all some cool things you could do with the check token middleware and how you can blanket methods with certain middlewares right here, which I'm going to do. And we're going to build out our actual notes portion here. I don't want to build too much of it out because I know ultimately when I start adding more and more tables and adding columns and things like that, it'll have a lot of retroactive consequences for the notes and sessions and campaigns, because you probably want to organize your Dungeons and Dragons notes in that regard. Again, I don't know how crazy full featured my goal is on this application. I'll just kind of take it one step at a time, see how long this playlist is going to go and how many hours it's going to span. But yeah, we're here with this cool app, and let's continue on. So notice here that my video is now widescreen, so hopefully y'all appreciate the new setup. I rebuilt my desk, got a new microphone, a new camera, new streaming light, new everything basically. So I'm just trying to keep on improving in both my coding and my personal AV journey here. So yeah, okay. We also need to have some kind of auth route before I begin building out the CRUD operations for my notes side of this particular project and application. I'm going to add a new router in my auth directory here. We'll call it validate.ts. We'll call it, I guess, the validate router. I'm going to copy the login router logic really quick. So from the login file, I'm going to copy and paste it here just so I can quickly spool this one up here. So this will be auth, I guess, validate or auth /me, something like that, because I think I like cheeky routes like that. Again, you got to have some fun, right? So we'll call this me for this endpoint. It'll be a get request rather than a post request. The whole purpose of this auth validate me is just to see if our token works or not. So I don't want to grab the handle login middleware. I want the check token middleware. I'm not creating a JWT, so we can nuke that out of here and replace that check token as our middleware. And our response just needs to be whether we are validated or not. Status code 200 OK, which should be the default one anyway. But yeah, and have I doing message or I can't remember what I've been doing. I think I've been sending an object with a message inside of it. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what this is. I care more about the status code than the actual message. I'm gonna laugh if I did MSG elsewhere across this application, but we'll say the response will just say you Gucci, because we don't really care what the response message is. We just want to make sure that if we get a token from a login request, that this thing will send a status code of 200 telling us that, hey, this token is good. We want to make sure that this token doesn't have like a bad signature, or this token has been tampered with, or this token's expired or something like that. We're going to be using this endpoint throughout our auth logic on the front end. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. This is the way I like to do it for my side projects, because it gives me just enough auth to, well, have some features on my app and make sure that I'm not getting blasted by a bunch of bot accounts or something like that. So, I'm going to turn autosave back on. I've turned it off for my other series for conquering the YouTube or JavaScript interview. Another playlist you should check out in the Covalence channel. So also like, comment, subscribe. I should probably get some kind of like little animation that does that while I talk. That way I don't have to remember to say it myself every single time, because I'm not the type to like self-advertise like that. But okay, again, the point of this is to just validate the token. Expiration, signature, all that stuff. We're going to add it to our auth index now. So I'll do some quick copy pasting, and we're going to do some magic here. You can hold Alt and click to place a cursor at multiple locations across a file. I believe this is Option click on Mac. I'm not sure what it is, but the whole purpose here is because I want to quickly just import from that file, add a path and a router all by the same name. I can just do that right quick right there, like a little fancy find and replace almost. I didn't turn on autosave, did I? There we go. I clicked on save all. Okay, so now that we've added that route here, let's see if we can go and pull it up here in this example. So yeah, let's go ahead and I can zoom in some more since I'm actually widescreen and full screen now, which is kind of nice. This is a GET request to localhost 3000 / auth / validate / me. I have not provided a token, so right there, we got our message of no auth token, so clearly it's not validated because we didn't get a token. Let's go ahead and add our authorization headers of our bearer token. This is one from a previous video, which I actually shot last week in my batch process of shooting these. And how long did I set the expiration for? Because it says you Gucci, which I was not expecting to see, but maybe we set the expiration for pretty high. That would be in our environment variable file. How long did I set it for? 30 days. So that makes sense. Let's test this, and we'll set one for 15 seconds. We're gonna save this file. Again, I don't have any logic telling nodemon to restart with new environment variables. I should go and add like a nodemon JSON file that tells it, hey, watch this file for changes as well, not just what's in the source directory. Okay, we've recompiled now. We should be good to go with that new 15-second timer. Let's go ahead and get ourselves a fresh login token. There we go. I'm going to copy this without the quotes, and we're going to go paste it into this area here. So it should say you Gucci, which is what we expected. If I delete the capital U from the signature, that is no longer a valid signature. If I put it back, 15 seconds has gone by, which means our JWT is expired, which means they are going to be forced to be logged out because, well, that's exactly what we're looking at here. So basically, this route is going to be kind of like our asking point to see if our auth logic on the front end needs to reroute them or not. And hello, Percival DeRolo. Look at you. Speaking of Percival DeRolo, he's actually on this shirt here. Talked about it last time, Legend of Vox Machina Season 2. Good stuff. Check it out on Amazon Prime. And Season 1, if you're into DnD at all. You don't have to watch like their 5-hour-long Critical Role streams times hundreds for all their episodes, but checking out the animated series is pretty cool. Yeah, of course, like as soon as I mention him by name, Percival walks out of frame to the camera to the side monitor there. But I'm sure you'll see him passing through a couple more times. This is what he likes to do. Okie dokie. Like I said, this is our auth endpoint. We're going to be hitting over and over again from our front end just to confirm that who this person says they are is still valid and we can trust them and show them like protected pages and things like that, right? Now, I've been bad about looks like adding these to, well, this private one was just a test, so I'm not going to save it, but we need to save this register endpoint to our collection here. So we're going to click on that and we're going to save it. Save to the YouTube CRUD app series auth directory, and we'll call this the register request name. That way we had that saved there. And we're also going to add this to it here. We're going to call it the validate token request name in the collection of auth as well, because that makes sense. But we're going to be done there. Well, actually, no, we're not, because I have to go get another valid token that doesn't expire in 15 seconds. Yeah, so back to our environment variables and going back to 30 days here and restarting this application once again. There we go. And back to login. We should be able to log in and get a token. Oh, because I saved it with old credentials. Guessatest.com. There we go. And we're going to come over yonder and save our new token in our request headers. It doesn't really matter where we put them. Bearer token, and there we go. So yeah, this is not protected, so the token being there doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, it's not going to be there, so I'm going to put no auth on that one because it's going to be a public endpoint for now anyway. So we're going to save that one, and now we're going to begin building out the CRUD applications of the notes router. So we're back to our API logic here and working our way through here. So let's go. Let's head in there. Let's dive on in. All right, so in our notes router, like I said, I just wrote this one as an example to show how a private endpoint can be either like a individual endpoint level middleware where you can put that there, or you can blanket certain requests. Like I do think that in order to add, which is post, put for editing, or delete for, well, deleting content, to mess with notes of any kind other than reading them, I think that a user should be logged in order to do this kind of logic here. So, and we also might have like a details view where we get an individual note. So let's go ahead and rock that one out as well. Get API notes, and an ID is going to be the specific matcher for this route, meaning if there's an ID attached at the end of this endpoint, it should get one singular note. I like to keep them separate. I mean, I could write an if-else statement here. For example, you could write an ID question mark, colon ID. This is our route parameters. This is how you specify that there's going to be some value. This is your variable that you're making up. Like, this is a variable you are creating for a individual endpoint. They could be multiple on one route, or just one like this, or they can be optional with that question mark. And you can get them on the request object, and in particular, a property called rec.params. So rec.params.id is where this route parameter is going to come from. And I couldn't include it as an optional on this route here and simply add an if-else statement inside of this to differentiate that. I like keeping them separate, though. I've mentioned once in this video before that while we're building a REST API, REST APIs are more of a set of guidelines to say, hey, everyone coding servers, stop acting like this is the Wild West and doing whatever you want. Let's all collectively agree that we're going to follow this general set of guidelines for building a REST API. But over time and more features and microservices that you add to your backend, it's hard to follow that guideline. And I'll break REST rules fairly regularly for my own convenience. For example, I will probably add a join statement to the notes to get a person's username or email or first name or something like that, rather than having a separate endpoint where I have to add /user/name or something like that to join that table together. I'm just going to join them together because I want to. So that's what we're going to do right there. But anyway, all right, enough rambling. Let's actually go and code this out. Router.get, this will be a required no question mark ID. It must be there. What we talked about in the previous video when our register router fired up, remember we talked about what are called data transfer objects, in the sense that you should never just curry information from your networking layer into your data layer. That's a big no-no in larger scale projects. So we're going to follow that here as well. This represents a notes ID. So I'll call it ID, and it'll be rec.params.id coming in right there. And now we're going to have to go and add a query that not only takes the ID, but finds one query with that ID and returns the results to us. And we'll see if this will end up working here. So let's go to our corresponding queries file in the notes right there. Beautiful stuff right here. I like what I'm looking at. And just like in our users table where I showed y'all an interface that kind of represents a model that you would have if we were using an ORM, I'm not going to paste that here, and we'll call it the notes table. We know the notes table did indeed have an ID and created at, because they're going to be pretty much the same thing across everywhere. The user ID will be a string. What does the table actually look like? It's been so long since I actually wrote it. User ID, body, and created at. I kept it simple for now. Okay, cool. Body and string. Now, again, why am I putting optionals on all of these properties for TypeScript? It's because my select statement may not always be select everything from notes. It might be tatered down just to a name or a user ID or a body or something, or just the body of a note or something like that. That's a possibility that could happen, so that's why I'm including it in that way. Okay, so we're going to come down yonder and call this the one query and add it to our export list. So hopefully the error one of the errors will go away from this function here. Yeah, so now it recognizes that one is a promise that can happen, and ID is going to be the response. While we're here, I forgot to mention that our query utility file, if we take a look at that right quick, there it is. It responds to the MySQL OK packet as the default response, but remember, any select statement will instead be using an array of those objects. And even if they select one thing, it will be an array of those objects, right? Even in a select one from. This will have an arg that will be the ID of the note we're trying to match, which is a string value. So now the TypeScript is happy over yonder, and results actually knows what it is. It's a notes table array with that highlight right there. And it will be select star from notes where ID equals question mark. Remember the question mark and the escape values are for sanitizing and preventing SQL injection attacks. And there you go. There is our nice and simple select star from notes where ID equals question mark, and we pass it an ID, and we should be good to go. And we have the route written out. Let's go ahead and test it out over yonder. So we have get all, and we're going to go ahead and just copy and paste this over yonder. /, we have to add an ID. Now, because I didn't choose easy auto-incrementing numbered IDs from MySQL, I have to come over here and copy. So there's two notes that I have. One that starts with the body of ability, drain, action, animal type, and this one says asset effects, anti-magic. So that's let's look up more about asset effects, anti-magic. So I'm gonna copy this ID, paste it over yonder, and it should get me that singular note as this request. And yeah, now again, notice the type of response we got there. I like how I can zoom in and like everything but like the text I feel like is zooming in, which is very annoying. But yeah, so this is indeed the singular note if we were looking at like a details view. Like maybe our homepage shows like the titles of the notes, which I didn't include here. Go figure. Maybe it shows a preview of each note. And if we click on it, it takes us to a singular details view where we see all of the notes details. Maybe it's like a notes per session type situation. So they might be kind of long if you're a rigorous note taker like myself in DnD. Well, fairly rigorous. It depends on the session and my mood that day. But I'm pretty good at note taking. So it could be fairly long, meaning maybe we don't want to display 20,000 characters on the home page for each note. We just show like a 100 character preview. We click on it and it takes us to the details page, and that's what this is. Notice the response type, like I said, even if you're selecting one thing from MySQL, the default response type this driver gives us, or the driver meaning the MySQL library that we've installed in Node, is an array of objects. Remember that, folks. Array of objects, no matter what. So if you want just the object itself and not the array, you will have to reference it as index position 0 on the client side, or simply destructure it like this right here in our code on the back end. That way the response type now becomes the singular object. We can set it to our React state and just move on from there. So yeah, looks like she's working, and I have it ready to go, and this will be a public this can be a public request. I'm not going to put this behind token check of any kind. So yeah, looking good. Let's save it to our collection here. YouTube CRUD app, API notes. This is going to be get details. That way it says get details in the request there. Cool. All right, next we have to be able to add new notes. That's going to be a post request, and let's go code out this logic. So yeah, I mean, it's good that we have these two windows selected here because these are the two windows, or the two files, not windows, two files we're going to be working in together here. So let's go ahead and code the query out first for this one, then work our way back to the endpoint because it might make more sense that way. So here's what we're going to do for insert. We're going to use the exact same trick that we used in the register router from the previous video. And for those of us that have been waiting for this video to drop, compared to people that have been watching this straight through and know all this already, or remember this from the previous video because it wasn't that long ago. Remember, I showed y'all that we can pass in an object of values and use this shorthand to magically have it generate the proper query for us dynamically without having to list everything out manually, right? So, and I realized that I probably could have just told it that this values object will be something like the users table, considering, well, that's what we're doing. So I just realized I could have done that right there. So yeah, meaning the response type will be the OK packet when we insert something, so I'm not going to pass it any additional type right there. We're going to have an argument of values that will probably be resembling the notes table and the possibilities of these things. Well, we know that's auto-generated from SQL, but if we pass in a generated ID, a user ID, and a body, then honestly, we good to go, y'all. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, we're going to say insert into notes set question mark. And there we go. I'm going to pass it that object for it to destructure and to say values like that for our escaped set of values. And we'll write our insert statement right yonder, and there we go. Okay, looking good. Yeesh. So back to queries, or back from queries to the actual endpoints here. Let's go and write it here at the bottom. We'll co-op this one. We'll call this router.post. We'll change the comment as well for our own. I'll just say post API notes will be the path there. Now check token, we don't have to add, we can leave it here, but we don't actually need it because we have it blanketed via some cool tricks up here that all post requests on this particular route, because of that wildcard matching any path, but has a method of post, they must be logged in to see a response. Let's test this to see if it works here. It'll say private endpoints, same thing with the response. Let's go make sure it's still, the token check is working the way we expect it to. So we're going to write API notes post request, no authorization currently applied, which means, boom, no auth tokens are correct response right there. For authorization, bearer token, this should be a valid token, meaning this should run the response, which is private endpoint. So there we go. We now have it ready in under authorization bearer token scheme. So from there, we need to, just to be consistent, how did I do it for my register router? Yeah, so here you see where I created that data transfer object. We're going to do the exact same thing, which means I also need to bring in our good friend v4 as UUID v4 over into this file as well, because we're going to be generating a new UUID. I'm going to presume that the request body will have at the very least the body of their note, because we're going to generate the ID for this new note. MySQL will auto-generate the created at timestamp when it gets inserted, but we have to know what someone's user ID is. Now, thankfully, because this endpoint is behind the token check middleware, we should have access to our good buddy rec.payload. Remember, we added that as an interface type, saying anything behind check token adds that for us. If I go to my auth middlewares, rec.payload is whatever the payload is from the token's payload, right? So let's go take a look what's inside of there. It tells us the expiration time, the issued at time, and surprise, surprise, somebody's ID. This ID represents I claim to be this person. This ID, that's where it represents a user ID in our database. Welcome back, Percy. He's right below frame. Oh, there's his head. Come here. Come say hi to everybody. Again, like you tend to in videos. Come here. Dude, I can't see the monitor, my guy. Want to say something for the crowd? Nope. He'll come back to bother me. Always does. Okay, so that's rec.payload and we know the ID has to be a property on there. So we're going to use that to our advantage here. So we're going to say const note DTO before we insert it somewhere will be whatever's on the rec.body, which should just be, well, the body property of a note, because that's like the only thing we have to actually insert ourselves and write ourselves. It needs to generate an ID for this note, which will be a call to UUID v4, and it needs to have a user ID for someone who wrote it, represented by rec.payload.id, and there we go. That's our data transfer object, looking good. Let's send it. You know what? Let's send it as a response. Let's form it, and rather than console logging it, we're going to use the response window in Postman as our console log as we test to make sure this looks the way it's supposed to before we go ahead and insert it to our database. So in our body tab, I'm going to lower this raw JSON body, and I think it was like DnD ipsum that I was using of some kind. Let's go grab another one. DnD ipsum. Nope. Where's the simple one I was using? There it is. And we're going to generate just one paragraph and copy it. So we're going to manually... Oh, it doesn't let me do auto select, does it? Well, that's fine. I'll have to just edit something here. Paste. Yeah, I figured that was going to happen. That was going to have that weird break in its... There we go. Okay, so there's the body of this note we're trying to insert here. And we're going to send this request. Look at the response. There we go. So that right there, ID, user ID, and body, if you recall, is exactly what our insert statements had to look like. ID, user ID, body. So that's what I've been trying to generate here. Exactly what we see right here as our insert statement is exactly what I generated over here. This ID, user ID, and body. So there we go. We have a note data transfer object that looks like it's ready to be inserted. So let's go test that query. We are going to... Yeah, we're going to say const result equals await db.notes.insert and pass it our note DTO. And we're going to then send the result, which should be that MySQL OK packet response of like affected rows and things like that. So let's go ahead and make this request, gang, and boom. Hey, look at that. Affected rows 1. We have successfully inserted our first new note. Let's go and look at all those notes right there. What did I just add? Hey, look at that. Yeah, ability drained abjuration. That's the one I just did, right? Ability drained abjuration. Yeah, so there we go. We successfully added a new note, and we got the C in our CRUD operations set up and good to go. Now, I don't like this response right here, so let's go ahead and change this. Because, I mean, honestly, we could use this if we had to daisy chain queries or things like that, which we might have to worry about later, or making sure that affected rows is at least one and things like that, we can do some logic with this response if we wanted to, but my response isn't going to really help me as of right now. I care about affected rows personally, and then pretty much nothing else. But let's make it a better response by maybe sending the ID on the note DTO, so we can use that in some rerouting on the front end if we wanted to. So like when they insert a new note, maybe it automatically reroutes them to the new node it created. We can do that if we send back the ID of the note, and maybe just a message that says new note created. And that's just more for us, or maybe if we had this as a public API, people can know what's up, right? So I'm going to insert the exact same note, but don't worry, I'm not going to be populating my database with too much dummy repetitive data because I'm going to be easily to delete it. But yeah, check that out. That's a better response that you could work with on the front end to do some stuff with. Maybe a modal takes the message and says, new note created, or something like that. And then some automatic rerouting logic can say, oh, because I have the ID of the note, we can, for example, reroute to this page that automatically gets and displays the new note for us if we wanted to right there. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So we're going to go ahead and add this note to our list of CRUD operations. Post new. Bada bing. Okay, next, let's go ahead and crank out the delete, because editing is a harder one of the two when it comes to this kind of logic here. So we're going to write our new router.delete method. Bada bing. Now, in order to delete a note, we have to know what ID we're deleting. So there we go. Async rec res next fat arrow function try catch next error, whatever it happens to be, and voila. It is a delete method to /API/notes/ a required ID to make sure this note actually gets deleted. All right, so delete requests should be behind token check. They sure are. And in order to delete this note, two things need to be true before we get too far ahead of ourselves, right? So if we select star from notes in our database here, sorry, I can't hold on. Oh man, the widescreen really messed this one up, didn't it? This will be harder to read. I wonder if I could, hold on, folks. Okay, sorry for that little jump cut there. I had to mess with the preferences on my SQL editor since I haven't ran it on the new widescreen recording setup, but there we go. That should be actually a bit easier to read now. But there we go. So what the point I was coming here to make was that we can't, and a lot of my students will end up doing this, but Andrew and me will typically tell them, hey, be careful about this for this very reason. If I'm just making this project for myself, I would just say the ID is good enough, because if I can match a particular row. Did I add two notes of every? What is this? How do those get doubled? Anyway, if I add new notes, right? If I'm trying to delete them and I can provide the ID, it should be able to take that row and just delete that row without too much trouble, right? Because, well, that's enough to match the row. But if the ID identifies what row, delete it, call it a day. But we should probably also provide, in case other people use this app, I don't want someone that has logged in to go look at other people's notes and be able to delete them all willy-nilly. They should have the ID of the note, which will come from the client side, and the user ID, meaning who wrote this note. Does it match the person that is trying to delete it? Because if the person that wrote the note doesn't match who's claiming to delete it, it shouldn't delete the note. Meaning Luke's users should not be able to delete Percy's notes. Only Percy can delete Percy's notes. So in this case, we can't just write a simple select statement that looks like this. Delete from notes where ID equals question mark if we're thinking about our SQL queries in Node, because that would be fine if I'm the only person using this project, but because I don't want me deleting other people's notes, I'm also going to have an AND clause, so a where AND that says the user ID must also match. So these two columns values must match in order to delete the row. That way, again, you can't just have someone that registers a new account and then begins deleting everybody's notes, because that would not be a good application and people would not use it. So that's what I was trying to point across here in the workbench to visualize the data there some. And well, do we have who wants to delete the note? We sure do, don't we? We have it via the rec.payload.id. So we can have user ID equals rec.payload.id. We can have our ID, which is rec.params.id. Come on, keyboard, there we go. Work with me. We have our ID, we have our user ID, and now we could successfully send them to delete the note, which we haven't done yet. So let's go and add that here. Now we can't call this function delete because delete is a protected keyword in JavaScript. If you recall, it's used to delete properties off of objects. So we're going to call this the destroy function instead. Okay, it'll be a MySQL OK packet response type, so I'm not going to pass an additional type to TypeScript. Delete from notes, where ID equals question mark and AMD, and user ID equals question mark, end of query, two values in that order, pass them in, ID, string, and I'll pass them as two separate args here, and then user ID, string. There we go. Add it to our list, destroy. Okay, and now we should be able to run const result equals await db.notes.destroy ID, user ID in that order, and then we should be able to send that result as the response. There we go. And I might transform it to look like this one at a later time. So I realized I don't even need this variable here, considering I don't care what the result ends up being for that query. Well, it'll be the same down here after some testing. Let's go see if it works, however, right? So which note are we deleting is the question. There was one that was like doubled up in responses here. So let's go get all the notes. Yeah, these two at the bottom are the repeats, right? And that's what it looks like here. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and copy this ID and confirm. And yeah, so we're going to make a delete request. It's going to have to be behind the same authorization we've been using, which is bearer token. That was going to be the path of localhost 3000/API/notes/ a specific ID for deleting. No rec.body in use here. The payload should be the user ID. This rec parameter should be the ID, and I should get a MySQL OK packet response, which I did. And the response says affected rows 1, which means it should be deleted. Let's go confirm that instead of, how many notes do we have here? Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, it should now be 3. 1, 2, 3, not 4. So yeah, guess what? We just made our delete route. Easy peasy, right? It's super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Get in the comments if you know that reference. So yeah, let's go ahead, and I mean, this ID is going to be pointless because it's deleted now, but I'm going to leave it there as an artifact, and that I'm sure it'll screw me over somehow. We'll call this the destroy note feature, so we're going to save that to our operations, and there we go. Okay, now our fancy schmanciest one, which is our editing route. Let's go and add that as a query. So here's the thing about editing, right? From a query's perspective, it would be update notes set column equal to a new value where its ID is, well, whatever it needs to be, right? That's how I would update a column to a new value. In our case, we only have one column we can modify, which is the body column, right? So it'd be body, new body value, where ID is whatever, right? That's all we need to worry about in this application, which means I would theoretically be able to go to our notes queries and write the following: const update equals body string, whatever we're trying to update it to, query update notes set body equals question mark, where ID equals question mark, and query, and we'll pass in a body and an ID like that. Right? And that's what the update would look like, but I know, so again, this is like what I would deem as separating a newbie coder to an intermediate coder, is that you can already begin thinking of edge cases and thinking of problems your current code can't solve. Meaning, if I, like back when I first graduated this boot camp, I'd be happy with this and have to deal with the problems later because it solved the problem at hand. But now that I've been coding for several years since then, I know that I'm going to run into trouble when it comes time to add some new properties to my notes table, like maybe the title, maybe some meta tags about the notes, about the note that's written inside or something like that. So I have to be careful about hard coding stuff like this that doesn't scale, because once I start adding more columns, the potential to update those columns also increases, which means I'll have to keep on adding more and more question marks. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to rely on saying that we're going to pass in all possible edited note values. I'll call it the edited note val or something like that. For now, we're going to leave it as any. But no, it's going to be this. It can only be things from the notes table type, right? So at the moment, it's just, we're not going to be editing the ID and user ID, so those aren't really going to help us. But when we begin adding more columns alongside body as an editable values, that's where that notes table interface is going to give us a hand to know what properties are going to be there. I'm still going to pass in the ID as separate, even though it's part of this interface, because here's what I'm going to do here. Because body is not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be edited note as the object. Instead of set body equals question mark, we'll say set question mark to utilize the same shorthand we did up here. So now the edited note object will be deconstructed into the proper number of columns and whatever values we are reassigning to them at that particular row. So this will actually scale the more properties we add onto the request body, or as we add more columns to our SQL table, this will now just grow with it and be very handy, right? It'll grow with the number of things we want to potentially edit there. So that's cool. All right, let's actually go code that out. Router.put. I mean, it's the same thing as this. Who am I kidding? Let's go ahead and do that. Oh, yank. Yeet. Looks like I overcopied or undercopied something here. Oh, I copied too many quotations. There we go. Okay, so same deal. I don't want anybody willy-nilly editing somebody's note. So I want to make sure that my ID and user ID are, it's the same thing. So I realize now that we have to come back yonder and put the same where clause here, because we want to make sure that the person editing this note also owns the note. So again, I can't register a new account and go mess with people. User ID. There we go. Format. What does format do? Yeah, it moves it to a new line, it looked like. Yeah. Okay, cool. So there we go. Edited note, ID, user ID. Back to our response here. Let's go ahead and create our data transfer object. So I'm going to go and say const note DTO. ID will come from rec.params.id. User ID will come from the request payload.id, representing who this person claims to be. And then whatever else happens to be on the request body of what we're editing should be right there. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay. I realized I shouldn't have done that, because now I have to make the individual variables anyway, unless I change what my arguments are like. Ugh. I'm dumb. We'll do it this way. There. There we go. That makes a bit more sense. Okay, cool. So what is it? Expected 2 arguments, but got 3, huh? Yeah, I totally added 2 additional arguments here. ID, user ID, edited note. ID, user ID. Oh, it still says destroy. Update. There we go. Cool. So that should be what we're looking for right here. And yeah, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So in my list of notes, let's edit this one down here by this ID. So we're going to copy the ID of this note we're trying to edit. Put request to localhost 3000 API/note/ this value here. It needs to be authorized in order to make this request. Head to our body tab, raw JSON. Once again, wish that was a selectable radio option, so we having to go to the dropdown every time since it's so commonplace. This is our body, and what we're going to do here is, let's go get the body of the note as is, and just add a word at the beginning of it. I'll say Battle Master, which is the subclass I play on my fighter in my main campaign of the last 3 years. Dwarf, Battle Master, Fighter, Mountain Dwarf. Cool. So what is our response? Affected rows 1. Oh, look, something new. It's come to a message. Rows matched 1, changed 1, warning 0. So yeah, I edited a note that I created successfully. We can go to the Get All tab and look at it. And surprise, and there she is. There's the edited note with the keyword Battle Master at the head of it now. So there you go. We have successfully edited a note, and we've even written the route and its logic and the query to say, hey, if I add a new column in SQL and I add it to my interface, I can add it to my request body as title, and boom, it will automatically scale to the new type of update that needs to work with, right? So we'll call this the edit request name. Boom. All right. Well, guess what, folks? Our CRUD operations are done. That's what I'm talking about. So, yeah, I mean, this video is already 40 minutes long, and I want to make the front end like a clear divide or line in the series, because I want to make sure that I have like the most up-to-date React and decide what I want to style with rather than kind of do it on the fly in this video. But yeah, so one thing I guess I can add here before I close it is, once, like I was saying, you know, I tend to break REST protocol when it conveniences me, which we're actually going to do here in just a second. So what I'm going to do is, on my 2 select statements, what I want to do is, I don't want to include just the user ID. I also want to include maybe their email, maybe their, you know, eventually I want to add a username to this table. But for now, let's just say I want to show the first name of the user that wrote a note. So this is our get all notes query, as simple as it needs to be. But as you see here, well, we only have like, I think 2 users, so there's only so many options it could be. But the point being, come on, Discord. I thought I muted you in streamer mode. Okay, so we have our user ID here. It's a foreign key to the users table. That's some like database level sanitization, saying someone just can't make up user IDs and add them as notes to our table with that fake user ID. It has to be a real user. But I want to maybe also display on my React client end on my website the name of the person that wrote the note, or the username, or the character name it belongs to eventually. So yeah, for now, let's change it up from just this simple select star from notes. You don't have to do the new vertical lines. I'm doing it because I'm going to show you some cool things you could do here in just a moment. But we're not just selecting from notes anymore. If we have a shopping cart that is this query, we're dumping all the user data inside of it. That's what you kind of think of a join as. Technically, it's like a Venn diagram of circles that overlap each other. And there are things called inner, outer, left, and right joins. And we're going to be doing what's called a full inner join, which is done via just the join keyword. We have to specify what table we're looking to join to this query. We are joining the entirety of the users table, and now we put the keyword on, and you specify what column in each table correspond to each other between an equal sign, right? So table1.call equals table2.call. What is the relationship from table 1 to table 2? Now, I haven't aliased my tables yet, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy and paste them over the tables. I don't think the order matters if I did notes or users, right? In the users table, we are referencing the ID column in this foreign key relationship. In the notes table, it is the user ID column that we are referencing in this relationship. And if I format this, what does it look like? I've always thought it was so weird how it does these join statements and select statements like that, but it is what it is. Anyway, there's our lovely little new select statement with our join added into it. And voila. So now I have not only every column from the notes table, but I also have every column from the users table, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to copy and paste this query. There's a problem with this. Obviously, because I'm sending somebody's password to the front end. Big no-no, don't do this, or I'll kill ya. Just kidding, right? That's a bad idea, but we're going to do bad idea anyway for demonstration purposes. I'm going to change this to a template literal so I can do new lines, because you can't do new lines inside of regular strings, but you can in template literal. Let's format it and see what it does. And of course, it goofs it. That's all right. What does this format do? What I want you to do is the following. My little formatter. There. Trying to make it look like it did in SQL. But that's what we want to generate. Select star from notes, join everything together, and let's see what happens inside of our query now. Because it no longer is, because of the join, it's no longer just the notes table array. It's also going to be importing a new type. We're going to say import type from the users file, because now it's going to also be bringing in information from the users table, right? So we're going to have to specify it's an array that's going to be a set of notes table and users table. TypeScript might be unhappy with me because they share column names, which could be an issue, but that's okay. We'll deal with TypeScript when we get there. But it looks like it's fine, actually. Interestingly enough, it doesn't seem to care too much. Yeah, okay, cool. So we're saying it's a set of both of those, right? I think that, is that union, or is that, I think union is the pipeline. We'll go with this type for now. I don't care that. I don't care all that much. So let's go see what happens to the request here. This is the old request. Look at the new request incoming. Boom. Oh, yeah. Well, password. Terrible idea. We've already really screwed up the app by doing this, but ultimately, here's what I'm trying to show y'all. What column do they both have together? That's what I'm trying to get at here. Look at our response here. There's an ID. Moving it to my finger. And there's the other ID. Hold on. Which one's which? Well, this is my user ID. This is my users table over here, and I know this is my one registered user ID right here that's been writing notes, right? The guest at test.com individual. That's the user's ID. What are we seeing over here? The IDs of the notes. Oh, look at that. Because we have two columns of the same name with no alias, that can't happen in JavaScript code, right? You can't have an object that has two properties of the same name. So it looks like what happened is it selected the note and got its ID and then joined the users table, which also has an ID. And because that one was joined after the fact, it overrode the notes ID with our user ID column as the new value. So basically it overrode it. And that could cause some serious issues in your code if you're not careful. I speak from both experience and as a teacher seeing my students do it all the time, watching them fall into the trap and being like, you've activated my trap card, and then showing them how to fix the problem. So yeah, that's an issue. And the password is the biggest issue. All I really care about from the users table at the moment is somebody's first name, and maybe in the future it'll be their username or their character name, right? But so how do we fix that issue? Well, we have to simply craft our select statement a bit further. I'll say from the notes table, select every column, because that's the whole point of this thing, is to view our notes. Then I can say from the users table, just select their first name for me, and that's all I want you to do. Bada bing, bada boom. That's what I'm talking about. There's our new query without any of the problems of duplicate column names or the password being there. We simply specify what column from a table we're actually looking for. So I'm going to go add this to my query. Nope, let's copy both of these actually. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. We got our notes, we got our user's first name, and that's all we really care about. So back to our query. Run this sucker again, run the jewels, and let's see what we got. Yeah, so there you go. There's the proper ID of the note, who wrote it, by user ID for code purposes, the body of the note to display information on, when it was written, and the name of the person that wrote the note. And there we go. That is a dang good looking query right there. We're going to do the exact same thing on this query as we do for the one down yonder. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to paste this over, format. I know it messed up my select statement. It is what it is. We'll just do it this way. I don't really care if it looks jank or not. There. Okay, so We have to add our where clause in now, which typically goes at the end, where ID equals question mark. That's the end of our query. Okay, so that is our select statement for this one. For the details of the note, we'll do the exact same join of information in the note details here. So let's go ahead and see if that correctly runs in our tab here. So I'll say get a note details for me, please. Get this note's details. All right, that's a good error. You know what? That's fine. Column ID and where clause is ambiguous. I committed the classic blunder that I get on my students for, and I did it here live. Surprise, I make mistakes too. What the error is telling us here is column ID in the where clause is ambiguous. But you're like, what? No, it's the ID column for O. Well, my statement now has two tables, notes and users, that both have an ID column. So it's saying, hey, I don't know which table you're trying to make this where clause work on. We're going to say the notes table because, well, that's the point of this, is to display one note. Classic blunder. It's okay, happens to the best of us. Hey, and we got the note with the first name added, so that query is looking solid, looking good, folks. That is what I'm talking about. So yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for this video because the other operations are just fine. We have... Oh, but I should probably also update the TypeScript types, because that select statement is no longer just going to be the notes table it's selecting of an array of, but rather a combination of those two, right? Let's see what that actually does. I'm actually curious. Over here in the get one, let's see what results represents. It should be a combination, a union of both sets. Yeah, so... Yeah, okay. It's a combination of both types of users and notes table. So again, this isn't the best TypeScript, but it's, like I said at the beginning of this series, it's like a spectrum. I'm using it to give me an IntelliSense boost and preventing some dumb mistakes along the way. Rather than doing it as hardcore, strict typing everything, right? So, yeah. One last thing before I end this series, or end this part of the video for the series is what I mean, is let's go change the responses down here to be more akin to like this one, where we have a ID and message. So we'll say ID, comma, message, note deleted successfully. So I have some kind of message there. ID, this is a shorthand for ID colon ID. That way I can send the ID of the note I've just deleted. And we're going to do the exact same thing in the response for this one down yonder. Note updated successfully. And that way I don't need this result variable anymore either. I'm not going to care to make sure that my affected rows are 1. Because, I mean, that is a possibility, by the way. You could get not an error, because again, an error would mean something went wrong with the SQL syntax. We didn't provide an ID or something didn't match. But if we simply provide, you know, rather than rambling, let me show you what I mean. Now remember, I said I'm leaving the old ID up in this delete statement. Am I really deleting the note that many times? What is happening, right? What is going on here? That is because this statement, the SQL statement, delete from notes where ID equals this ID, is running. And that is a successful, well-structured query. It just happens to have no result. What that means is the affected rows are 0. It's running the query successfully, but there's nothing to delete with that ID. So it's like, hey, the query ran, it just didn't do anything. So if we were logging or looking at the results variable I just deleted, it would say, right? It would say affected rows 0. So this is where you could write an if-else statement or something like that. I mean, just if y'all wanted to see what I meant by this. Const results. If result dot affected rows is true, then I would send this response. All right? Otherwise, right? The note was not deleted successfully because there was no note by that ID. Let's go see what I mean. Right? there is no note with that ID because, right? If the affected rows was 0, which is considered falsy, which means it skips the if statement, it goes down to res.json WTF. So again, that's where you could put in some additional logic if you wanted to. So I can say if I could throw new error that says something like that, right? Just a generic error message that says no note with that ID to delete or something like that. Or that note doesn't exist. That's easier. This is not the note you were looking for. Whatever, it doesn't really matter what it says, right? Let's go see if that makes a change here. Yeah, there we go. We'll say note does not exist. There we go. So yeah, that's some cool additional logic you can throw there to really kind of empower this endpoint to make sure that that ends up being the case there. So if the affected rows are 0, that means that it ran the query successfully, but it didn't actually delete something, right? So there we go. Just pointing that out there. Let's go delete another new one here. What do we have? Let's just delete the newest one I added that edited the Battle Master one. Take that ID, copy it, paste it over this route parameter, delete the note. Note deleted successfully. Let's try running the query again. Note does not exist. Internal server error. Technically, it's not an error. I should make the error and set it status code, because technically that's, what is the status code for? Not bad request. Because technically it worked. I mean, that's a status code, okay. List of status codes for HTTP, please. There's some actually meme status codes I always like to bring up to my students as well. Early hints. Technically it's a successful response. It's just like, it's like a whatever. No content, I guess, 204. Partial again, like, I'm just being nitpicky here. This doesn't really matter all that much. 304, not modified. No, because that's for caching purposes. It's not a bad request. I mean, technically it is. But it's not a client error. So maybe 500 is fine. 404, not found, would make sense because, well, the note no longer exists. Not acceptable. Yeah, not acceptable makes sense, right? Response is sent when the web server, after performing server-driven content negotiation, doesn't find any content that conforms to the criteria given by the user agent. So the user agent, the website, would be like, hey, I want to delete this note. And the server's like, all right, let me go ahead and go do that. Oh, wait a minute. Something went wrong in that. Something did not go as expected. It generated an error. Yeah, whatever. Again, I'm just being nitpicky here. I was just saying that's something you can take into consideration, but this is just fine for now. Anyway, yeah, that should round out this video here. I'm going to save that tab to make sure my collection's saved. And I think in the next video, it's finally time to go to the front end and decide what styling we're going to do, if any, and some routing and some auth stuff. So we're finally there, folks. See y'all in the next video for some React content, finally!